With Hector and Jacob's arrangements, all the guests in attendance at the Harmon family gathering gradually left, and the annual event came to a jarring end. In order to prevent any other parties from taking advantage of the situation, Hector gave everyone firm instructions to keep what happened a secret and that under no circumstances was any information to be leaked. When all the guests had left, about 100 of the Harmons stayed back. As part of the Harmon family, they understood that if anything were to happen to the family, they would be similarly implicated, so they were all in it together. "We really appreciate your help in finding the culprit, Dustin. Had it not been for you, the Harmon family would have suffered a tremendous loss." Hector patted Dustin on the shoulder with admiration in his eyes. It was rare to come by such a fine young man. "Dad, Dustin saved our entire family. Surely you're not just thanking him verbally?" Natasha prompted. "Of course not." Hector smiled. "Dustin, if there's anything that you need, just name it. I'll try my best to fulfill your wish. If you really mean it, Mr. Harmon, I'd like to request that Natasha's marriage alliance and let her have her freedom," Dustin said earnestly. Well, Hector frowned. A moment later, he shook his head. "I'm really grateful to you for saving my family. But this is one thing I cannot promise you." "Why? Is it only because the Grants are able to help you defeat the Dark Lord?" Dustin questioned. "It's one thing to defeat the Dark Lord." Hector sighed and continued helplessly. "The marriage alliance had been agreed upon a long time ago. If we suddenly decide to annul it, it would be akin to publicly disgracing the Grant family, and its repercussions would be beyond our imagination." There were 3 prominent families in South City. The Murrays had a military background, and with General Christopher Murray as head of the household, they were highly respected and had the military behind them. The High Illinois family, on the other hand, had their connections in the martial world. As someone who had been a master of the Balerno martial arts, Paul Hill had a myriad of disciples across the nation. His prestige in the martial world was unrivaled. As for the Grants, they had both military power and connections in the martial world. Their multifaceted development made them the family who thrived and flourished the most out of the 3 influential families. Their wealth of knowledge, experience, and resources, and how extremely well-informed they were about current affairs because of all their connections made them more formidable than the Dark Lord himself. He amounted to nothing when compared to the powers that the Grant family possessed. Harmon stood a chance against the Dark Lord, but they were utterly helpless against the Grants. And that just was how things stood with the Harmons now. Annulling the marriage alliance was simply out of the question. They dared not even think about it. "Say, Mr. Harmon, would it change things if it wasn't the Harmons who decided to cancel the marriage but the Grants instead?" Dustin asked cautiously. "I know you're holding out hope for that, but chances of that ever happening is about as close to 0. Hector shook his head. "The reason why the Grants agreed to the marriage alliance was because they were interested in our family's potential in the business world so that they can bring their family's status up to a whole new level with our support in the industry. But would you agree to it if the Grants decided to annul the arrangement?" Dustin probed. "If it really comes to that, I guess I'll be forced to agree." Hector chuckled. "Dad, mark your words." Natasha broke out into a grin when she heard his words. "As long as Tyler Grant decides to annul the marriage arrangement, you must never force me into a marriage again. What do you have in mind?" Hector felt uneasiness coming over him. This daughter of his always had the wildest ideas. "Don't you worry about that. All you've got to do is remember what you just said." Natasha did not explain any further. Just as Hector was about to say something, Mrs. Davies came over. "Mr. Harmon, the Grants are here to visit," she reported. "Hurry up and welcome them." Without wasting any time, he personally went out to welcome them with the rest of the Harmons in tow. Outside the gates, a large throng of smartly dressed people awaited. There were several luxurious cars and a whole lot of bodyguards standing guard behind them. It was a grand sight to behold as there were easily 100 people gathering. A man and a woman stood right at the forefront. The charismatic man had a tall physique that exuded a commanding presence, and his sharp eyes seemed to be able to see through everything. Every step he took gave out a strong air of danger and menace, as though he were the Grim Reaper himself making his way through a sea of bloody corpses. He stood out from the crowd and carried such an air of reverence. This was none other than the impressive Tyler Grant, and the lady beside him was Jailer Grant, whom Dustin had had a chance encounter with. Tyler, I've asked Natasha about her thoughts on this marriage alliance before. She seemed to have expressed that she did not wish to marry you. Jailer said off-handedly. That's not her choice to make. No matter what she says, I will get the woman I have my eyes on, Tyler said domineeringly with such confidence. You're right. Jailer nodded in agreement. It doesn't matter what Natasha thinks. This is an alliance of two families. She's just a woman. She has no right to say anything about it. They're here. Tyler raised his head and gazed straight ahead. The gates to the Harmon estate swung open, and Hector, along with the rest of the Harmons, swiftly came forward to welcome them. Sorry to keep you waiting. Tyler. Come on in. Hector politely beckoned for them to enter. Soon, they were all brought into the compound of the Harmon estate. As they made their way in, the Harmons stood to either side of them, showing their respect and sincerity. Bring us tea, Hector instructed the household staff. Once they settled down in the lounge, all sorts of refreshments were served. The Harmons demonstrated such courtesy and were as respectful as could be. Mr. Harmon, you should know that the purpose of our visit today is to send you the bride token, Jailer started, and as she spoke, she gave a clap as a signal. In no time, boxes upon boxes of gifts were brought to them. Upon opening the boxes, they found them to be full of priceless goods. Some were packed full of gold bars, some were full of accessories made of pure gold, and others carried jewelry of all sorts. There were over 20 boxes in total, and every one of them held goods of priceless worth. It was truly astonishing. Mr. Harmon, will this be enough for the bride token? Jailer asked with her chin proudly lifted. Tyler, however, just sat by the side, sipping on his tea as though all of these were none of his business. Of course it is. We're very pleased with the sincerity that the Grant family has shown us. Hector nodded with a smile. Great. Since you're happy with this, we shall proceed with the marriage. We will come for the bride in 10 days. Jailer cut things straight to the point. Sir. Hector was just about to agree to the arrangement when the crisp voice of a woman sounded. No, I do not agree to this. What? When they heard that, everyone's gaze shot over to the entrance of the lounge. With everyone's eyes on her, Natasha slowly made her way into the lounge with several people behind her. I do not agree to the marriage alliance. You do not agree? Jailer's expression darkened. Have you any idea what you're saying, Natasha? Of course I have. And I stand by my words, I will not marry Tyler Grant. Natasha said impassively. What is the meaning of this? Mr. Harmon? Are you going back on our arrangement? Tyler slowly looked up. His sharp gaze directed pointedly at Hector. Have you ever considered the repercussions of your actions?